Welcome to Mira Stories. Welcome to stories that will keep you on edge.
Have you ever felt that uneasy chill when walking past a place that seems too quiet? The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it listens. The townsfolk of Brimstead knew that silence well. At the heart of their sleepy little town stood the old Wicker Graveyard, a forgotten patch of earth where grass refused to grow and fog clung to the stones even in daylight. For decades, no one dared to speak of it openly. It wasn't fear of ghosts, at least, not at first. It was shame, buried deep like the bones beneath the soil. The story began with Eleanor Hayes, a quiet 28-year-old journalist who had returned to Brimstead after her father's sudden death. He had been the town's gravedigger, a job he never spoke of, a burden he carried in silence. In his final days, he'd left her a small iron key wrapped in yellowed paper. Written in his shaky hand were the words, "For the truth they buried with me." At first, Eleanor thought it was just the ramblings of a dying man. But that night, as rain battered her window and thunder rolled over the town, she heard it, a faint whisper through the walls. A whisper that came from beneath the floorboards. The next morning, she searched her late father's workshop. The air smelled of damp earth and old varnish. His tools lay neatly arranged, as if waiting for him to return. That's when she found a wooden box hidden under a loose plank. Inside were dozens of old photographs, grainy black and white images of graves, each marked with a strange symbol etched into the headstones, a spiral made of 7 uneven lines. Some graves had no names, only that mark. Others had names that were later scratched out. Among the photos was one that made her stomach drop, a picture of her own mother's grave. But her mother was supposed to have been cremated 20 years ago. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The key her father left behind, maybe it unlocked something in the graveyard. Maybe he wanted her to find out. That evening, she went to the old Wicker Graveyard. The iron gate groaned like a dying animal as she pushed it open. A crow shrieked and vanished into the mist. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, catching glimpses of crooked stones and faded names. The ground beneath her boots felt soft, too soft, as if the earth hadn't settled. Then she saw it, a small, locked crypt near the far corner, half buried in ivy. The same spiral symbol was carved into its door. Her hands trembled as she fit the iron key into the lock. It turned with a metallic click. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Her flashlight flickered. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding a small wooden box identical to the one she'd found in her father's workshop. Only one box sat open, and inside was a human jawbone with teeth still intact, wrapped in faded cloth. Beneath it lay a letter sealed with wax. The seal bore her father's initials. She hesitated, then tore it open. The handwriting was messy, rushed, like someone writing in fear. "If you're reading this, Ellie, it means they found me. The truth is older than this town, older than our name. The Wicker Graveyard is not a resting place, it's a vault. What's buried there were never meant to be found. Leave it alone, or the ground will claim you too." Her flashlight dimmed. The sound of something shifting echoed from the corner. She turned the beam, nothing. Just empty shelves and shadows. But as she stepped back, her boot caught on something buried in the dirt floor. She knelt and brushed it aside, revealing a metal tag with the number 23 engraved on it. A faint sound rose from beneath the ground. Not wind. Not footsteps. A murmur. Then, the soil moved. Eleanor stumbled back, heart racing. The ground where she'd knelt began to bulge, like something underneath was pressing upward. She fled from the crypt, slamming the door shut behind her. As she sprinted through the graveyard, rain poured down in sheets. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, she saw them, figures standing among the graves, still as statues, watching her. When the light faded, they were gone. She didn't stop running until she reached her car. But when she looked in the rearview mirror, she froze. The reflection of the back seat was wrong. There was a figure there, pale and still, whispering words she couldn't hear. Her car stalled. The headlights flickered. And then, silence. Back at home, drenched and shaking, Eleanor locked every door and sat with the letter under a single lamp. She couldn't stop thinking about the number 23. She checked the old graveyard registry on her father's desk, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw the entry. Grave 23, reserved. No record of burial. Reserved, for whom? As she read further, she saw that every entry from 1978 onward was missing. Whole pages torn out. Later that night, as she tried to sleep, the whisper returned, only this time, it wasn't coming from the floorboards. It was coming from inside her head. A voice, calm, sorrowful, and tired, repeating one phrase over and over. Find me before they do. And with that, Eleanor realized something horrifying. Her father hadn't just buried the dead. He'd buried secrets. And now, the ground was calling her to uncover them. When Eleanor woke the next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still carried the weight of the storm. The streets of Brimstead looked washed clean, almost too clean, like the town was trying to erase what happened the night before. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the graveyard, the crypt, the moving soil, and those figures standing motionless among the tombstones. Yet what frightened her most wasn't what she saw. It was the whisper she heard, the voice that called her by name. Eleanor drove to the town library as soon as it opened. It was an old brick building, half swallowed by ivy, the kind of place where the air smelled of forgotten paper and dust. The librarian, Mrs. Alcott, had known Eleanor's family for years. When Eleanor asked for records about the old Wicker Graveyard, the woman's smile faded. That place, she whispered, glancing around. You shouldn't go digging into that. Not after what happened. Eleanor pressed. What happened? Mrs. Alcott hesitated. People started disappearing. Back in the late 70s. One by one. It was always the same, they'd go missing at night, and the next morning, a new grave would appear. No funeral. No name. Just, there. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Did anyone investigate? Your father did, Mrs. Alcott said quietly. He was the one who found the graves. And then, he stopped talking about them. In the library's archives, Eleanor found old newspaper clippings. Most were small, buried in the back pages. Local man missing. Shopkeeper vanishes overnight. Strange disturbances at Wicker Cemetery. But one article stood out, dated October 12, 1978. The headline read, Town Council shuts down Wicker Cemetery after unexplained events. Below it was a black and white photograph. The image showed a group of men standing near an open grave, their faces pale and tense. Among them, was her father. And right beside him stood a man Eleanor didn't recognize, tall, gaunt, wearing a long coat and hat. His eyes seemed to look directly into the camera. Underneath, the caption read, Local historian Arthur Vance assists authorities in closure of site. Eleanor scribbled the name in her notebook. She needed to find him. A quick search of the town records revealed an address, Vance House, Hillbrook Lane, on the far edge of town. It was nearly abandoned territory, where houses stood empty and the woods grew thick around the edges. When she arrived, the old mansion looked lifeless. The paint had peeled to gray, windows boarded up, vines crawling across the porch. Still, faint smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was inside. Eleanor hesitated, then knocked. The door opened slowly. An old man stood there, stooped, his pale eyes sharp despite the years. You shouldn't have come here, he said, before she even spoke. She steadied herself. Mr. Vance, my name is Eleanor Hayes. My father was. The gravedigger, he interrupted. Yes, I remember him. He tried to stop it once. Stop what? Vance's eyes darted toward the window. The soil remembers everything buried within it. Your father learned that too late. The Wicker Graveyard was never built on hallowed ground, it was built to contain something. Eleanor frowned. Contain? He motioned for her to come inside. The house was filled with stacks of books, maps, and sketches of the cemetery. In one corner stood a dusty glass case holding a rusted iron mask, its mouth sealed shut. That symbol on the graves, he said, pulling out a notebook. The spiral of 7 lines, it's not decorative. It's a binding mark. Used centuries ago to trap spirits that couldn't rest. Your graveyard wasn't made for the dead, it was made for the damned. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. My father was protecting the town? Vance nodded. He was one of the keepers. Every generation, someone watched the site, made sure the seals held. But when your father died, the chain was broken. And now, the ground is stirring again. He leaned forward. Whatever you saw in that crypt, don't open another one. Promise me. But Eleanor didn't answer. Because at that very moment, her phone vibrated. A new message, from an unknown number. It contained a single photograph. Her father's gravestone. Only now, there was fresh soil disturbed beside it. And carved into the stone, the same spiral symbol. Eleanor's heart pounded as she looked up. Someone's digging up my father's grave. Vance's face went pale. Then it's already begun. He rushed to the window, peering through the curtains. They're trying to unbind what your father sealed away. And if they succeed, he turned back to her, voice trembling. Brimstead will vanish like the others. Who's they? She asked. Vance whispered, the Order of the Hollow Moon. They were the ones who started the burials, centuries ago. They believed the souls of sinners could be turned into guardians, bound to watch over forbidden knowledge. But the ritual corrupted them. Those guardians became the things haunting your graveyard. Eleanor's phone buzzed again, another message. This time, a voice note. She pressed play. A man's voice, distant, rasping, and weak. Ellie, it's me, don't trust. Static cut the rest. Her breath caught. The voice was unmistakable. It was her father's. Arthur Vance's hand shook as he grabbed a lantern. He's warning you. They know you've begun digging into this. If you stay here, they'll come for you. Who? She demanded. But before he could answer, every light in the house flickered, and went out. The sound of creaking floorboards echoed through the hallway. Then, a soft whisper, the same voice she'd heard before. Find me before they do. Eleanor grabbed her flashlight and swung it toward the sound. For a split second, she saw something at the end of the corridor, a figure standing in the dark, head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then it was gone. Arthur whispered, they followed you here. Glass shattered. The iron mask in the display case had fallen to the floor, and when Eleanor bent to pick it up, she noticed something horrifying, the inside was lined with teeth marks. Her father's letter echoed in her mind, leave it alone, or the ground will claim you too. But she couldn't stop now. She had to know the truth, even if it meant digging up her father's grave.
Night returned to Brimstead with a heaviness that felt alive. The fog thickened over the roads, swallowing the streetlights one by one. Eleanor drove toward the cemetery, her hands gripping the wheel tight. The photograph of her father's grave replayed in her mind, the disturbed soil, the spiral mark, the warning she ignored. Arthur Vance's words echoed. If the seal breaks, the ground remembers. She didn't know what that meant, but something inside her needed to see it for herself. When she reached the cemetery, the iron gate stood wide open. The fog rolled like breath from something sleeping. She turned off her headlights and stepped out, her flashlight beam slicing through the mist. The path was silent, too silent. Even the insects were gone. When she reached her father's grave, her breath caught. The earth was freshly dug, a dark, open wound in the ground. And there was no coffin inside. Only a small wooden box. She knelt, brushing away the dirt. The box was old, carved with the same spiral symbol. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a cassette tape, its label smeared but legible. For Ellie, play alone. Her father didn't own a cassette player anymore, but the church across from the cemetery did. She remembered the caretaker, Father Jonah, used one to record sermons. She ran through the fog toward the chapel. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and still. Candles burned low along the altar. She found the tape recorder sitting near a stack of hymn books, dust-covered and old. She slid in the tape and pressed play. For a moment, only static. Then, her father's voice. "Ellie, if you found this, it means I failed. The graves you've seen, they're not graves. They're seals. Each one holds a voice that once tried to speak the truth. When the town silenced them, the ground took them instead. Don't let them trick you. They sound like the ones you love, but they're not. They remember pain, and they want to share it." The tape clicked, then hissed. And then, another voice came through. Not his. A woman's voice. Soft. Shaking. "Eleanor." Eleanor froze. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. "It's your mother." The tape kept playing, the voice trembling. "He buried me there, Ellie. Said it was to protect you. But I've been calling ever since. You heard me, didn't you? The whisper in your head." Eleanor's hand shook as she stopped the tape. Her mother had died when she was 6. Burned in a house fire. There was no body, that's what she'd been told her whole life. Had her father lied? The floor creaked. She turned. Someone, or something, was standing by the doorway of the church. A woman, pale as moonlight, in a torn nightgown, hair hanging wet around her face. Her eyes were hollow, yet they glowed faintly, like candle flames under water.
Eleanor's body locked. The woman stepped closer. "Ellie, you came back." Eleanor stumbled backward, hitting a pew. "You're not real. You're not my mother." The figure tilted her head, expression twisting into something mournful. "He buried me with the others. Said it was mercy. But mercy doesn't sound like dirt in your lungs." The lights flickered. Every candle went out. The air grew colder. In the darkness, the whispering began again, dozens of voices now, overlapping. "Find me. It hurts." She broke the seal. Eleanor ran. She burst out of the church into the fog, gasping. The whispering followed her, echoing from the trees, from the ground, from inside her mind. The fog around her thickened into shapes, outlines of people, faint and trembling, like smoke trapped in glass. She sprinted to her car, started it, and drove without looking back. When she finally reached her father's house, dawn was breaking. The first light of morning spilled across the floorboards. She slammed the door shut and leaned against it, shaking. Her reflection in the hallway mirror caught her eye. She looked pale, hollow. But as she stared, something behind her moved. A shadow, darker than the rest. It whispered her name. Eleanor turned slowly. Nothing there. She picked up her father's journal, the one she'd found beside his bed after he died. She hadn't dared open it before. But now, she needed answers. Inside, each page was filled with frantic notes and sketches of the graveyard. He'd drawn the spiral symbol over and over, surrounding one phrase written in red ink. The dead don't rest. They wait. At the bottom of the page, one final entry. Grave 23, do not disturb. She closed the book slowly. That was the grave where she found the cassette. The whisper came again, softer this time. Eleanor, please. It was her mother's voice. But now, instead of fear, she felt something else, a strange pull, deep and sorrowful. What if her father had trapped her mother's spirit in that grave? What if all those graves were filled not with monsters, but with people wronged, silenced, buried alive by the truth? Eleanor wiped her eyes. She made a decision. She would go back to the graveyard one last time. Not to run, but to dig. To uncover what her father, and this town, had been hiding for decades. As she packed her flashlight, the old iron key, and the journal into a bag, the morning sun began to fade behind thick clouds again. The storm was coming back. And deep beneath the soil of Brimstead, something else was waking. The next evening came with a thunderstorm that rolled over Brimstead like a living thing. The wind rattled Eleanor's windows, and every flash of lightning carved the sky open in jagged white lines. She sat at her father's old desk, the journal open, the iron key beside it. Rain tapped against the windowpane in a rhythmic, almost deliberate pattern, as if echoing the heartbeat of the town itself. She had spent the day trying to ignore the whispers. They came now in short bursts, faint, echoing from corners that weren't there. Sometimes they sounded like her father. Sometimes her mother. And sometimes they spoke words she couldn't understand. But she knew one thing, she couldn't run anymore. She needed to return to the graveyard. Not as a daughter seeking answers, but as a keeper, like her father before her. Before leaving, she checked the basement, the one room she'd avoided since her father's death. It always smelled of earth, like the graveyard itself had seeped into the concrete. The door creaked open. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of soil labeled with names and numbers: Carter, 12, Lynn, 19, Vance, 21. Each one sealed tight. At the center sat a wooden chest, carved with the spiral symbol. She unlocked it using the iron key. Inside were dozens of metal tags, just like the one she'd found marked 23. And beneath them, a letter. Ellie, the keeper's duty is not to protect the living from the dead. It's to protect the dead from the living. Every voice sealed beneath that soil was once a truth someone wanted erased. If you break the seals, you release more than spirits. You release memory. Her hands shook. All this time, she thought her father had been hiding something dark, but maybe he had been shielding her from something worse. She whispered to the empty room, "What did you do, Dad?" The whisper that answered wasn't his. He tried to save them. Eleanor froze. The voice came from behind her. Arthur Vance stood in the shadows of the stairwell, his lantern casting long, trembling lines across the walls. His face was pale and wet from the rain. "How did you?" "I followed you," he said. "I couldn't let you go alone. You've awakened the keeper's curse." "What do you mean?" He stepped closer. "Every keeper bears the mark when they break the first seal. You can hear the voices now, can't you?" She nodded slowly. "They'll grow stronger," he said softly. "Until you can't tell which thoughts are yours and which belong to the dead." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Then how do I stop it?" He hesitated. "You can't. But you can contain it, the same way your father did." He bound his soul to the graveyard itself to keep it quiet. That's why he left you the key. It's not just metal. It's the last piece of him still holding the seals together. The basement lights flickered. One of the jars on the shelf began to rattle, the soil inside shifting on its own. Vance's eyes widened. "They've found us." The floor vibrated, a low hum rising from beneath the foundation. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then came the first scream, faint, echoing, like wind through a tunnel. But it wasn't the wind. The jars began to crack. Soil poured from the seams, and as it hit the ground, it moved, slithering like something alive. Eleanor grabbed the iron key. "We have to go." They ran up the stairs, slamming the door behind them. But even as they locked it, they could still hear the voices, louder now, desperate, angry. "You promised to remember us. You sealed our names. You buried the truth." They fled into the storm, lightning flashing across the sky. As they reached the edge of the graveyard, Vance stopped, breathing hard. "Do you see it?" he whispered. At the far end of the cemetery, several graves glowed faintly, a sickly green light seeping from the soil. One after another, the seals were breaking. Eleanor stepped closer, rain pouring down her face. "Who's doing this?" Vance pointed toward the woods. "The Order. They never disbanded. They've been waiting for a new keeper to weaken the seals. You were the key they needed." Her heart sank. "They used me." "Yes," he said. "And now, the only way to stop them, is to finish what your father started." A figure emerged from the trees, cloaked, faceless in the rain. In one hand, they held a lantern shaped like a skull, in the other, a shovel. Eleanor recognized the spiral symbol etched into the handle. The figure's voice was low, distorted by the wind. "The ground remembers, child. And tonight, it will speak." Vance pushed her back. "Run." The cloaked figure plunged the shovel into the earth, and the ground screamed. The rain turned to mist, the fog rising in waves. Shapes began to form, dozens of figures, translucent, drifting between the headstones. Some looked human. Others did not. Eleanor fell to her knees, covering her ears. The voices were deafening now. "He promised us peace. He lied. You carry his blood." Vance shouted something, but his words were lost in the storm. One of the spirits, a tall man with hollow eyes, reached for him. His hand passed through Vance's chest, and the old man gasped, his lantern shattering. Light and darkness burst together in a single flash, then silence. When the fog cleared, Vance was gone. Only his journal lay on the grass, pages fluttering in the rain. Eleanor picked it up. The last page was blank, except for one fresh line of writing that hadn't been there before. The keeper must return what was stolen. She clutched the iron key in her fist, rain dripping from her hair. The storm raged around her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. If her father had bound his soul to the graveyard to protect the truth, then maybe she could do the same, not to hide it, but to free it. And somewhere beneath her feet, the whisper came again, softer now, almost pleading. "Ellie, finish it." Morning never truly came to Brimstead that day. The storm had stripped the town of color, streets glazed in rain, windows shuttered, and the sky a dull gray bruise. Eleanor drove through the empty lanes toward the town's outskirts, Vance's soaked journal on the seat beside her. She hadn't slept. The voices no longer whispered from the ground, they followed her inside her mind. Yet between their fragments, pain, pleading, loss, she could feel direction. They were guiding her somewhere. When she turned the final corner, she saw it, a half-collapsed chapel hidden behind the trees. The crescent moon symbol carved into its wooden doors matched the mark from the shovel handle. Inside, the chapel smelled of damp ashes and candle wax. Dozens of photographs and documents were nailed to the walls, missing person flyers, burial records, and sketches of the spiral seal. At the center stood a circle of stone tablets, each engraved with names that had been violently scratched out. A woman stepped out from behind the altar. Tall, calm, dressed in a black coat that gleamed with rain. "You shouldn't have come alone, Miss Hayes," she said. Her voice was soft but carried authority. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the key in her pocket. "Who are you?" "I am Margaret Vale, the current matron of the Order of the Hollow Moon." The same order your father betrayed. Eleanor's pulse thudded. He didn't betray anyone. He protected this town. Vale tilted her head. From the truth, perhaps. We were never the villains, child. We preserved knowledge, voices that once spoke truths too dangerous to survive. Your father wanted to silence them forever. We only wanted to listen. She gestured toward the circle of tablets. Each seal keeps a memory trapped. Every time a keeper dies, the seals weaken. You, Eleanor, are the bloodline that holds them shut. When you found the crypt, you reopened the bridge. Eleanor shook her head. You're twisting it. Those voices are suffering. And you think suffering makes them evil? Vale smiled faintly. Pain remembers what the living forget. We call it the echo of sin. The town's prosperity was built on what we buried beneath it. Lightning cracked through the roof, illuminating rows of shadowed figures behind her, followers of the order, faces masked by pale cloth, each holding a lantern. The green light from the graveyard pulsed faintly inside each flame. Vale continued, your father tried to destroy us by sealing the truth inside himself. But even he could not silence the voices forever. You will finish what he began, one way or another. She held out a small black book. Take it. It's your mother's confession. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped forward. The book was damp and cold. On the first page was her mother's handwriting. I was one of them. The order promised knowledge of life beyond death. Your father found out. He stopped us. He buried me alive to keep the secret from spreading. Eleanor's knees went weak. Her mother, a member of the order? The whisper inside her head trembled with sorrow. He had no choice. Vale's voice softened. He wasn't cruel, child. He believed he was saving you. But salvation built on lies rots the soul. The seals are breaking because truth demands to be heard. Help us finish it, open grave 23 completely. Let the voices speak, and we will set them free. Eleanor stared down at the book, torn between horror and aching grief. What happens if I refuse? Vale smiled. Then the earth will take what it's owed. Starting with you. Suddenly, a loud crack shook the chapel. One of the followers screamed as the floor split beneath him, swallowing him whole. Cold air burst upward like a breath from below. Eleanor backed away, clutching the key. The ground trembled, stone tablets shattering. The spirit's whispers turned into words, dozens overlapping. We remember. Release us. The keeper must choose. Margaret Vale raised her arms. The seals are open. The dead will speak. Eleanor ran for the door, the journal pressed to her chest. As she fled into the rain, a voice followed, her father's again, carried on the wind. Ellie, not all truth deserves the light. By the time she reached her car, the chapel behind her had collapsed into a pit of fire and fog. The cries of the dead echoed faintly, fading into the storm. She fell to her knees in the mud, sobbing. For the first time, she wasn't sure who was right, her father, who silenced the truth, or her mother, who died for it. She looked down at the iron key. The metal was warm against her skin. A new line had appeared, etched along its side as if carved by invisible hands. Final seal, midnight. Eleanor wiped her face, breathing hard. Whatever happened next, she had until midnight to decide. Unseal the grave and release the voices, or lock them away forever. The storm had not stopped since midnight was written on the key. Eleanor drove back toward the graveyard, headlights barely slicing through the fog. The rain whispered against the windshield, but beneath it, another rhythm beat, a pulse, deep and ancient, coming from the earth itself. She parked by the rusted gates. The graves ahead glowed faintly, as if they were breathing. Her father's voice whispered inside her head again. Not all truth deserves the light. And her mother's followed, softer but firm. Only by revealing can you end the curse. Both voices. Both right. Both wrong. Eleanor gripped the iron key so tightly that the edges cut into her palm. She stepped through the gates. The graveyard was alive. Fog rolled like smoke over the tombstones, twisting into faces that blinked and disappeared. The ground pulsed beneath her boots, as though veins of light ran under the soil. At the far end, grave 23 waited, its marker shattered, its soil glowing from within. She knelt beside it, heart hammering. The air was freezing, yet the ground radiated warmth. Vance's journal had said, "The keeper must return what was stolen." She opened it again, flipping through pages until she found the line her father had underlined years ago. The final seal can only be broken by blood that carries both silence and truth. Her hands trembled. She finally understood. Her parents, the keeper and the confessor, had bound the curse together through their love, and she, their daughter, carried both halves. She was the final seal. A voice broke through the silence. "You came back." Margaret Vale stood at the edge of the fog, her black coat soaked, eyes glimmering with reflected light. Behind her, several members of the order held their lanterns high. "Don't do this," Eleanor said. "You don't understand what's down there." Vale smiled. "I've devoted my life to understanding. You were born to open what your father died to protect. Let the world remember what it buried." She gestured. "The soil is listening." Eleanor looked at the grave again. The light was growing brighter, and faint shapes were moving beneath the surface, arms, faces, thousands of memories rising at once. The whispering turned into a chorus. Keeper. Confessor. Daughter of both. Choose. Her mind filled with their memories. Children crying out from plague houses. Men buried alive during the old town's expansion. Women silenced for knowing too much. The foundation of Brimstead was built on bones and lies. Her breath broke. They were murdered. Vale nodded slowly. And then forgotten. Until now. Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. "You think freeing them will fix that?" "It will expose it," Vale said. "And that is enough." Lightning ripped the sky in half. The iron key in Eleanor's hand began to glow red-hot. She dropped to her knees, pressing it into the soil. The ground convulsed. A crack split the grave open, green light spilling upward like liquid fire. Wind howled through the cemetery. The order's lanterns flickered, some extinguished. Vale stepped closer, shouting over the storm, "Yes. Let them rise." But as the spirits emerged, Eleanor saw something terrible, each face twisted with agony. The more light escaped, the more the graves around them darkened, collapsing into voids. They weren't being freed. They were being consumed. Her father's voice roared through her mind. "Ellie, stop. The truth must rest." Her mother's voice countered, aching with sorrow. "Don't repeat our sin. End it properly." Eleanor fell forward, clutching the key. The wind screamed, the earth cracked, and through it all, she whispered, "Then let peace be the truth." She raised the key high, and plunged it into the ground one final time. The light burst outward, blinding and white. The entire graveyard went silent. The order's members fell to their knees, shielding their eyes. Margaret Vale screamed as her lantern shattered, its green flame vanishing. When the storm faded, the graves were still. The soil no longer glowed. The wind no longer whispered. Only rain and quiet. Eleanor stood alone. Her hair and coat were drenched, but her face was calm. The iron key lay half buried in the soil, now dull and lifeless. She looked toward the chapel's ruins in the distance, smoke rising faintly from where it had burned. Her father's voice whispered one last time. "Thank you." And her mother's followed, peaceful at last. You freed us all. As dawn broke over Brimstead for the first time in days, Eleanor walked away from the graveyard without looking back. Behind her, the graves stood silent, not haunted, not cursed. Just remembered. Narrator's reflection/moral lesson. In every town, every family, every heart, there are truths buried too deep to face. But silence feeds ghosts, while honesty sets them free. Eleanor learned that peace isn't found in hiding the past, it's found in facing it, even when it hurts. Brimstead was quiet again. Days passed since the storm. The air was clean, the sky bright, but the town carried a strange emptiness, as if the earth itself was still catching its breath. The graveyard gates had been sealed by the council. Fresh flowers appeared on the fence each morning, though no one ever saw who left them. Eleanor lived at the edge of town now, in her father's old house. She rarely spoke, but neighbors sometimes saw her sitting by the window at dusk, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the fog drift over the trees. To most, she was the girl who ended the curse. To herself, she was just the last keeper, of memory, of truth, of peace. The official story spread fast. The papers said lightning had struck the old chapel, collapsing it. The graveyard landslide was blamed on unstable ground. But those who had been there that night, those who saw the green light, knew better. They just didn't speak of it. The Order of the Hollow Moon was never found again. Margaret Vale's name disappeared from all records, as if she'd never existed. And yet, on certain nights, when fog rolled through the town square, people swore they heard faint footsteps, followed by the sound of pages turning, as though someone were still recording history in secret. Inside her home, Eleanor had created her own memorial. She had placed Vance's journal, her parents' letters, and the broken iron key inside a glass case. Above it hung a small wooden plaque that read, "Let those who rest beneath the soil be remembered in truth." She'd begun writing again, not about hauntings or curses, but about lives lost and stories buried. Each week she sent a new entry to the town's archive, making sure every forgotten name from the graveyard had a story to go with it. Her words became a bridge between the living and the dead. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Eleanor walked back to the graveyard. The gate was rusted but unlocked. The air smelled of wet moss and stone. The graves were no longer glowing, but she could still feel the hum beneath her feet, faint and warm. She knelt before grave 23. The soil was smooth, grass already growing. "Thank you," she whispered. And for the first time, she thought she heard laughter, soft, like the wind through leaves. Not haunting. Not angry. Just free. As she stood to leave, she noticed something near the old oak tree, a child's toy, half buried in the dirt. She brushed off the mud and saw initials carved into it, E.H. Her father had carved those for her when she was 6. He used to tell her that toys carry memories, that even wood remembers kindness. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. He was still here, in every leaf and whisper of the wind. The chapel ruins became a garden. And the graveyard, once shunned, was now part of the school's walking tours, a reminder that history, no matter how dark, could be honored instead of buried. But one house remained untouched by time, the Hayes home on the hill. Inside, Eleanor sat before a desk covered in papers, a single microphone before her. The same kind her father used to record his field notes. The lamp beside her flickered softly. She pressed the record button. The red light blinked. "This is Eleanor Hayes," she began, her voice low but steady. "Daughter of the last keeper of Brimstead. And this is my final record." She paused, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty, it was full of presence. "I've spent a year gathering the stories of those who were buried without names. Each one had a life, a secret, a voice. Tonight, I'll share the last of them." She turned a page in her notebook. The story of a boy named Samuel Wren, age 12. He worked in the coal tunnels beneath the town, sealing cracks no adult could reach. One day the tunnel collapsed. They buried him as unknown. His mother never stopped searching. Her voice caught. Now, his name is remembered. Samuel Wren. 1889 to 1901. The clock ticked in the background. Rain tapped softly on the window. Eleanor closed her notebook and whispered, "All of them are free now." But then she heard it, faint, familiar. A whisper, rising from the floorboards. "You remembered us." She smiled. "Always." The sound faded. The light steadied. She ended the recording, labeling the tape, Graveyard Tapes, Volume 8. Then she placed it with the others in a wooden box. That night, before going to bed, she stood at her window. The graveyard lights shimmered faintly in the distance. Not hauntingly, just enough to be seen, like a quiet heartbeat. A sense of peace filled the air. She whispered to the night. "Rest now. I'll tell your stories for as long as I live." The wind stirred, and for a moment she could swear she heard her father's chuckle, her mother's sigh, and dozens of other voices, all fading into the stars.
Truth doesn't vanish when buried. It waits, patient as the dead, for someone brave enough to listen. And when that truth is finally spoken aloud, the ghosts stop haunting. They start to heal. Because sometimes, remembering is the most powerful exorcism of all. End.